Hello, everybody. I'm Jim Collison. I'm the CliftonStrengths Community Manager here at Gallup. I'm here with Brandon Mills, and Brandon, welcome to LinkedIn Live.
Thanks for having me, Jim. Happy to be here.
Yeah, so good to have you. We're going to get to know you here in just a minute, but as we kind of gather a crowd on LinkedIn, it just takes a minute or two for everybody to get here. So if you are just joining us, want to check in. If you want to throw in chat, if you want to throw your top five in chat, you can do that. We're posing a question, and Brandon, I'll pose this to you kind of a little bit of pre-show to say, oh, what's the best advice you ever received early in your career? We're kind of talking about leveraging your strengths early in your career. As you've been and you're in that spot right now, best advice, it should be pretty recent. What was the best advice you've ever got?
The best advice, Jim, I would have to say is that it's a marathon, not a race.
Hmm.
I think that's the biggest thing for me. It's just helping understand that, it takes time to understand things. So,
It's a marathon, not a have you been tempted to kind of see it as a race at times? Feel like you got to sprint out the gate?
def well, Jim, I ran track, so, and I was a
Yeah.
sprinter, so I love to go fast, but, having that momentum to slow down and actually see things from a different lens
Yeah.
is the best thing I can do.
Now I'm an old guy. I've got some advice too, but before I do that, if you're just joining us, throw your top five if you have it. Throw your Clifton Strengths top five in the chat. We'd love to see it. Producer Riley, behind the scenes, we'll drop that in chat for us. And we're asking the question of what's the best advice you received early in your career. Throw that in chat as well. Brandon, I had a professor when I was in college. The earth was still cooling in those days, but I had a professor when I was in college say to me, Jim, everything before 40, I know that seems old, but everything before 40 is practice.
Yeah.
And it kind of took the pressure off of me as young, early in my career to just not be so stressed about every single move that I made, right? I think, right, we put a lot of pressure on our college students, on our fresh grads, on our early grads to have it all figured out. Brandon, did you feel that pressure a little bit of like, gosh, I got to have this all figured out before I'm even 30?
Yeah, no, definitely for sure. And to go off that point, I would probably say I'm probably still feeling it a little bit now. But I think as I got out of college, I kind of slowed down a bit. I got here to Gallup and things, I started to understand who I was as a person, and I started to realize that I don't really have to have everything figured out. And
Mm.
as I, learned a little bit more about my strengths, I found different ways to think about things and how to carry things out. So it's pretty interesting.
Yeah, yeah, no, it's a little bit. I think it's a little. We got to take a little pressure off in some regards, and at the same time, and we're going to spend a few minutes talking to you about this specifically, using your Clifton strengths to help guide in that way, to help maybe speed up getting to some of those things that you're better at, or you enjoy doing, or you find flow in. Right, some of those we're going to ask you here specifically. If you're just joining us, we'll get started here in just a minute. We're asking you to throw your top five in chat. Riley behind the scenes, I'll call her producer Riley behind the scenes, is going to be putting those up. By the way, she's practicing some great well-being behind the scenes. She's on a treadmill while we're doing this. It's awesome, and she's
It's pretty
throwing
cool.
your yeah. It's a great way to do it while you're in meetings. And then let us know in chat. We'll take these questions throughout the program. What's the best advice you ever received early in your career? What really kind of helped you get in and get that settled down? And thank you for joining us. I'm here with Brandon Mills today, and Brandon, we're talking a little bit about it, the leveraging your strengths early in your career, and I've been around a while. I think we're gonna kind of talk about this and use you as talk about it in a series. But let's get to know you a little bit. Tell us, Brandon, tell us your top five and a little bit about your current role here at Gallup.
Yeah, absolutely. So my top five are intellection, positivity, discipline, connectedness, and learner. And I will say that's a pretty interesting bunch there, and I'll talk a little bit about that here in a bit. My role here at Gallup is talent development specialist. And with that role, I kind of just say I like to help develop people. It's kind of my favorite thing to do is making sure that people can see the best possible versions of themselves here at Gallup. So something that I love doing here at Gallup.
Yeah, what have you can you give me a specific example of something in your role that you've taken on that you really have enjoyed doing?
Yeah, so the biggest thing that I do, I think, when it comes to helping develop people, is I'm pretty much in charge of our whole onboarding process here, where they have the opportunity to learn about their strengths, their developmental process. and making sure that they actually need and have the tools to equip them to do their job successfully. And it's pretty great to just see everyone, smiling faces when they first get here, whether I'm taking them on a tour or they're going through our training process. They're just amazing people that come through our door.
You really satisfy the Q1, Q2, and some of Q3 and our Q12 process, right? Helping people know it's expected of them their first day, right?
Hmm.
Helping people make sure they have the materials and equipment to do their role on their first day. And then of course, having them have the opportunity to do what they do best sets up for onboarding. How important, what have you learned about the onboarding? We'll probably have some certified coaches and some folks that strengths enthusiasts. What have you learned about the onboarding process that's so important to somebody's first day? How's that affected you and what you've learned thinking about that through a strengths lens?
I think when looking at people when they first get here, I think the biggest thing is, their first 30 days are the biggest times of their career when they first get here. And what I've noticed is that people are really intrigued to learn all about what the company is, what they do, and why is it so important that I'm here? And for me, as I started to understand why people really are intrigued in understanding all that stuff, it helped me really do my job more effectively
Mm,
and making sure they have the opportunity to develop themselves and understand the necessities that they need to know. And then as I started to grow a little bit and figure things out, I started to learn more about like a strengths developmental process inside of that. So, and it all just tied back to their strengths. So, um, it's a great experience for me
mm.
to see how people interact with each other, how they can learn more about their strengths, and how they can just grow from their first day from getting here.
That's awesome. Tell us your top five again. And by the way, I'll tell individuals listening on LinkedIn if they've got questions for Brandon, throw them in chat. We'll be taking those questions here as we're doing this live. But Brandon, thinking about your own top five, and remind individuals listening what your top five are again. And
Yeah.
then let's talk a little bit how they fit into to your role here specifically.
So my top five, once again, it's intellection, positivity, discipline, connectedness, and learner. And, when I think how that really ties into my role. So I lead with relationship building, Jim. So I love to just talk to people. It's just a habit of mine. And so it really just fits in perfectly with the onboarding process. I get a chance to communicate with a lot of our new hires, and implement different types of learning opportunities for everyone here at the company. And so as I kind of just go through my role and understanding how people work, that relationship building really comes out, and I get a chance to really talk to people, build those connections with others, and showcase my positivity to in as well.
No, I love that. We ask this question all the time about themes that you lead with, and you think about your current role.
Mhm.
And I'm going to maybe do the two phases of this question. One, how do you feel you're leading in your current role today, or what are you leaning into? And then, how's that different than maybe before you started here?
Oh, that's such a great question. I think when looking at the biggest theme that lead into it, I would have to say my positivity is the biggest one. And I'd love to see if anyone has positivity too. Feel free to just throw it in the chat
I've
here. But
seen a few out there. Yeah, we have a few.
so positivity is my biggest one. I think it showcases in everything that I do. When people just look at me, they're like, "Oh, you're always so happy all the time." I'm like, "Well, positivity number two. I got to showcase it." And I really just see it when I first got here. I don't think I really seen my positivity as much. I just thought I was like a happy person. And as I started to learn a little bit more about my strengths, I had the opportunity to really connect with people and see how I interact with others. And as I started to interact with others, it was like, "Oh, you're just a great person to be around." And I'm like,
Mm.
"Oh, I guess that positivity really is shining through there." So it was a big opportunity for me to kind of just learn a little bit about it.
Yeah, I have positivity 6, and your office is actually just a few steps away from mine, and so we get the opportunity to work together. And definitely that's been I think in a lot of cases, we often talk about good partnerships having opposite or having complementary themes, but for you and I, it's the same theme, and I think we
Yeah,
both lean into it when we're ever together. So I've always appreciated your partnership
thank you.
when we think about that. And one of the reasons why I wanted to get you in this environment and let you talk to people, how is that different today? So let's go back to the second part of that question. How do you see that today versus before you started here at Gallup, or before you started thinking about this career through a strengths lens?
Hmm. I think when looking at that, I think before I got here, my understanding on strengths were, I guess it wasn't really too big for myself. Um, and I had took the Clifton Strengths assessment when I first was a freshman in college, and I looked at it and I had the opportunity to just go, "Oh, this is pretty interesting." But I never really used it. It was one of those things I would just look at here and there, and it kept my mind, thinking and racing. But I kind of seen that similarities of how my strengths work in a lot of the things that I was doing, but I never really put it into action.
Mm,
And as it translated to me getting here, the opportunity of me to actually learn a little bit more about my strengths, I seen those really go into action when I started doing a lot more of my work. I started seeing it going into action when I had the opportunity to talk to different types of people. And I feel like I just grown tremendously. I also had the opportunity to
mm,
become a certified Clifton Strengths coach, which really helped out and help understand what my strengths are, what they mean. And it was just a big opportunity for me to just grow and develop myself, and taking that dive to understand what my strengths truly mean.
no, that's great. As we think about, and as you think about some practical tips for those early in their career thinking through this, you've learned a lot in that as well. How do you think? What kind of tips would you give those thinking about maybe they've just gotten their Clifton Strengths, their top five, or an all 34 report? They're thinking about how to leverage this in the role that they're in. What kind of tips would you have for them, Brandon?
I think one of the biggest things I would say is that, you know, if you're starting to get into the Clifton Strengths world and you're understanding what your strengths mean, don't be afraid to lean into people who don't really have similar strengths as you. I think that's a big thing for me. I think I started to actually just realize that a couple months ago, Jim, but I don't have a lot of influencing themes myself. And so I lean into those people who do have them because they have a lot more input and opportunities to give those things that I do not have. So it's almost like filling in the gaps there. One, I will say this really quickly. The people who lead with maximization have become my best friends. I tell you
Mm,
that
hmm.
they make everything that I create tons better, and it's the best experience. So, it's okay to realize that if someone has, strategic thinking domains and you don't really have that many, lean into those people because they'll be great partners if you're
Mm,
not really looking at it from that lens. Another thing I would say is be vocal about what your strengths are.
mm,
A lot of people really want to know what your strengths are, and the opportunity that you get to talk about those strengths and really give people the chance to understand who you are, really opens up a lot of doors and gives you those keys to have the accessibility to take a deeper dive into who that person is as well.
when you're thinking about a culture that may be strengths based in a sense,
Mhm.
or where folks know their top five, what kind of advantage do you think that gives in approaching that conversation? So as you're thinking, if I already know and I've got it posted on my door, what kind of advantage does that give you working with me in the conversation, do you think?
I think it's a big step up. One of the things I do here at Gallup is, I think my first month here, I walked around the entire floor of ours and I looked at everyone's strengths. I was just like, oh, what are these people lead with? A lot of achievers, a lot of learners. And it really just helps you understand how people operate. And the biggest thing that I think I could have done is I looked up my manager's strengths before I actually had the opportunity to meet him, and it helped me understand how he thinks, how he processes things, and how I can really be the best partner to him. So for a lot of the corporations and companies who have their strengths posted, or it's just somewhere where it's accessible for people to view, you kind of just get a step up on how to be a lot more effective when working in that organization or company.
I love that. There's almost a like you can pre-plan a meeting
Yeah,
with right. You kind of like, okay, if I haven't met this person before, and I think early in someone's career, you're going to get a lot of those opportunities where there's a lot of new people around you. Although,
yeah,
to be honest, during this time of great resignation, great transformation, I've started calling it in some ways, as organizations are being transformed. All of a sudden, there's so many new people here at Gallup that I don't know. That gives me an opportunity to do that same kind of, and I'll call it personal onboarding in some ways. I
yeah,
have to onboard these folks onto my, into my environment and figure out, okay, who are they? How can I use them? How could they fit into the team framework, right? Let's do that with you really quick as we think about your top five. Now you have the advantage, you know all 34. So you can go beyond the top five if you want. If you think about applying that or how you've applied it into your role specifically as onboarding or learning and development here, walk me through that process of what are you thinking about. Take a task that you need to do, and then let's apply some themes to it for to get that, because I do have high maximizer, to get that maximization out of it. Let's talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, definitely. And I'll talk about one of the things that I'm going through right now that we're rolling out as a company is our annual compliance training, right?
Mm.
And it takes
By the
a
way, super fun. Compliance is always super. Everybody loves it. They get super excited about, when are we
gotta
doing
love it.
compliance, Brandon? When are we doing it? Right?
I
Uh,
wish I had
I
comments like that all the time, Jim.
I know.
But when looking at it, I have this approach. So I lead with intellection, right? So I'll start with that. Before compliance even starts, I really have to have time to myself to just really think and lay out how I can organize our compliance learning and how it can be useful for the company, how people are actually going to complete the training, and how we can make it really engaging for a lot of our associates here. So I'll take maybe like a week, Jim, to really plan things out in my head first, and that's really just my intellection showing there. And then from there, I lead with my connectedness as well. So that's going to be number four. And what I'll do is I'll make connections with everyone. I'll talk to, our legal team. I'll talk to my manager, my someone else who's on my team as well, and make those connections to really get their input and see how can be the best way that we can make this a lot more effective than previous years. And then looking at my other strengths as well. So also a big advocate for includer, and that's my number six. So I love to just pull people in and make sure, what are they actually seeing when it comes out to this training? Like, how can I improve this? How can I make this a lot more, useful for you, not as much on the tedious side, but, make it a lot more engaging for a lot of our associates. So that strengths process there, when I kind of lean into my strengths and see how I can really roll out this training and help people out, I lean into my strengths in a big ton. And going back to
Mm,
my point too, Jim, is that I'll lean on, people on my team as well for different types of input that I may not have in my top 10. For example, my boss he has activator pretty high. So it's somewhat difficult for me to just go ahead and get started on some things. But he has activator and he can just get us started right away. And I'm like, okay, well, I guess it's time to go.
mhm.
And that really just helps me a lot when it comes into our compliance learning.
Now, your go-to is Dean Jones, and a
Yes.
lot of folks listening on this call, they know Dean Jones, right? Dean, of course, joins me on Call to Coach all the time. Is fabulous teacher. How do you? You've mentioned Dean's themes and your themes. As you think about your relationship to your manager, then in this theme combo, how often do you find, or what's the advantage to knowing that for you specifically in some ways, and how does that help you just kind of be a member of the team?
I think when looking at that, I think it's one of the best feelings. I think when you know the person's strengths that you're working very closely with, you really know how to fit and how you guys really fit into each other perfectly. So as I started to, talk to Dean a lot more frequently as I first got here and understood his strengths and took a deeper dive into really seeing, what his insights were on his strengths, it helped me realize how he processes things, what he expects from me, and really how we can work cooperatively. And it really helped me basically plan out for like the future and how we can get things done. And it's really just a big advantage when you have the opportunity to look at someone else's strengths that you're working very closely with and really develop this type of plan that you guys can execute and get things done successfully based upon those strengths. It's one of the
Hmm.
biggest things I think I've really learned here.
Yeah, it's a huge advantage, I think, to be able to know those things that your manager, the a project manager doesn't have to be a direct manager in that, but it gives you kind of that leg up that gives you this ability to quickly get to the point as opposed to maybe trying to dance around it. right?
Exactly,
And
exactly.
yeah, so it's great. It's awesome. We're getting your questions in, which is awesome. Continue to throw those in there. But this question came in from chat. Did you know your strengths before you went to work at Gallup? Curious about the value of understanding them through the job search. Brandon, talk a little bit about that.
So I actually did. Well, yes, I did. When I first discovered my strengths, I was a freshman in college. I went to Midland University. And as I went there, the first thing that we do is you go through your strengths assessment and you figure out what your strengths were. And like I said, I didn't really use them as much, and I think that's my biggest regret right now is
Mm,
that I didn't really use them. I didn't know how to use them. But as I had the opportunity to actually come here to Gallup, which is the greatest thing. And I took that deeper dive into understanding what my strengths were. I learned a little bit more about myself, and it has been the biggest, by far biggest discovery of understanding how I can be effective in my role, effective in life, effective in every aspect that I do. And I also took the step forward to becoming a certified strengths coach as well. So that, just gave me the bonus there.
hmm
But it was by far the biggest thing I could have done is coming here to Gallup because it really just expanded my idea around strengths and how I can discover myself a lot more frequently.
What about in the job search as you were coming here? How do you think you use that? Did you use it in building the resume? Did you use it in the interview? Talk a little bit about the actual process.
So I definitely added it on my resume before I actually even applied here to Gallup. I think showcasing what your strengths are, I kind of knew, if I showcase what my strengths are, people can kind of see the type of person that I was. And as I was going through the job search, it was one of the funniest things is because as I knew about my strengths already as a freshman. And as I got to my senior year, I was like, I've drove past Gallup a few times, beautiful building. I was like, you know what? Why not? Like, why not just do it? And so I applied to Gallup, and I did something great because I'm here. But it was pretty interesting to go through the interview process because I didn't really mention my strengths as much, but the questions that I was asked about my strengths, I started to lean into it a little bit more. And that was basically the discovery there when I actually wanted to take that deeper step into understanding what my strengths were before I even got the job here.
Mm, mm.
And as I got here, I got the opportunity to learn a little bit more about those strengths.
Yeah, I think well said in that. Another question, Jim, Brandon, what are your favorite ways to use strengths with internal and external teams? Brandon, I'll throw that. I've got something to say, but Brandon, what about you? How are your favorite ways to do that?
Um, wow, that is such a great question there. I think internally, the biggest thing that I do is I look at people's strengths before I meet with them. And it really helps me understand how people are going to think and how they're going to react and how they're going to look at the task that we have at hand. So as far as working internally, it's a like I said, it's a big step up. And as you before you even get to the meeting, it's almost like you know that person already. So you can execute depending on the project perfectly because you already know what they're going to want, what they're going to want to know, and how they're going to want to execute.
I think sometimes, and by the way, we're still taking your questions in chat. So if you got questions for us, throw those in there. We'd love to have them. I think, Brandon, sometimes people think it's a one and done exercise. We meet together as a team, maybe for the first time, do a little bit of a focus on you, talk about strengths, and then we don't come back to it. And I think actually the framework, at least for me, has worked best in times of stress. If the team's getting ready to go into a stressful time, or if we're if we're already there and we're battling a little bit. Like I have this saying, where two or more are gathered, there is conflict. It
Yeah,
just happens, right? No matter what the intentions are. And I think coming back to these themes, right? Coming back to this idea of, hey, wait a minute, we're struggling. First of all, to be able to call it out, we're struggling a little bit. This isn't as going as well as I had hoped. Let's focus a little bit. Tell me what themes, because sometimes these strengths bang up against each other, right?
that's
And
true.
so calling that out in context and saying, "Oh, yeah, 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 your my woo," which drives some folks crazy. My woo is killing your deliberative because and I have woo activator, which is even worse. So I'm moving fast all the time. And strategic deliberative is like, "Hey, I need some time to think about this." And really,
Yeah.
I just need to know that. right? And then,
Yeah.
okay, yeah, I'm just moving because that's my natural tendency, right?
Hmm.
But I can slow it down if I know it's going to help. It's going to help you, give you some time to think about it. In that case, the other one I mentioned this when we first started here was of taking like themes and maximizing them to the potential. You and I both have this high positivity, and so when we get together, it tends to be a pretty positive conversation and
It's like
maximizing
fireworks.
that. Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, it's always good. I enjoy spending time with you. It's I enjoy just grabbing lunch with you or just chatting with you in the hallway.
Yeah.
And that begins those kind of conversations can begin to accelerate productivity, I think is what it is, right? Any other, as you think about that, this idea of using them with internal, anything else come to mind, Brandon, for you?
Um, I think when looking at, just as you're looking through your themes too, it's always just one of those big things to, I think, going to your point, Jim, we both have positivity pretty high. I think making connections with people based upon their themes and understanding if people have similar themes as you, it can be a really interesting experience because some people may not perceive their themes the same way.
Mhm.
No themes are really
Mhm.
the same for everyone. I think when I
Mhm.
look at my positivity compared to, your positivity, it may show up differently. I'm a person
Mhm.
that just smiles all the time. If I'm talking to someone, I'm just going to smile. I'm also going to talk positively on anything that I'm doing. I'm not really just like a negative person. So for some people, they might just be a person who looks at the positive aspect of everything. So it's one of those great things to make those connections with people who have similar themes as you.
Yeah, no, right on. You talked about putting these themes in your resume.
Hmm.
What kind of advice would you give if if you went back to the college you graduated from and you're talking to a group of seniors and they're getting ready to put resumes together or whatever? What kind of advice would you give them? And then maybe even about talking about it in the interview. Thoughts on that?
I think the biggest thing that, if I had to go back to a lot of the seniors back in my college now, I would definitely say, and if they're chiming in here now, uh, definitely take the opportunity to learn a lot more about your strengths. It is when I say it's a game changer, I actually like completely mean that. It changed the whole aspect on how I look at things. And it made me a lot better of a person, and it made me a lot better associate here at Gallup. And so another thing I would say when it comes to, during the interview process and as you're going through jobs, if you have the opportunity to see other people's strengths, definitely go in and do that before your interview because it helps you understand the type of person that they are, the things that they might be looking for. And really, like I said, it's almost like you know that person already before you even get a chance to meet them. So definitely those two tips of advice can really
Mm,
go a long way.
mm. That's great. We just have a few minutes left, and I want to ask you this one final question. What advice would you give to someone who's new to Clifton Strengths? And you were around it in school. Now you're a certified coach, so the pressure is on. What advice would you give to someone who's new to Clifton Strengths?
If I had to get advice, the biggest thing I would say, if you have the opportunity to become a certified Clifton Strengths coach, definitely do it. That is my biggest tip of advice right there. I think if you're really interested in strengths and you're not a certified coach, that is that big step up for you to understand a little bit about strengths, and you can coach other people about the information that you know, and it's the biggest game
Mm,
changer there because you have the foundation of understanding what your strengths are, but taking that next step up can really just change your complete aspect on how you look at strengths as well. And I guess my other tip of advice for someone who's is really interested in strengths is if you don't have the opportunity to become a certified Clifton Strengths coach, just learn more about strengths. It's a really big opportunity for you to develop yourself and look into your insights a little bit deeper because the opportunity for you to understand yourself a little bit more can go a really long way.
From a personal learning perspective, do you have a go-to tool or something that you use to kind of to continue to learn about it?
Yes, so I have these on my card here, my desk here, and I'll go ahead and pull them up. But I have these opening cards, so whenever someone comes into my office, it's one of the tools I got after becoming a certified strengths coach. And I love to just ask people those questions to get their insights on how they use their themes, and how they can actually learn a little bit more about their
That
strengths.
that's awesome, Brandon. Thanks for taking the time today to be a part of this. Appreciate you coming out.
Of course. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. We'll remind those listening that if they want to get more of this, we've got a whole bunch of this kind of content that's available now in our Clifton Strengths podcast. And so if you haven't subscribed to that on any podcast app, search the Clifton Strengths podcast. We try not to make it too difficult to find it. Go out there, subscribe to it. You can also catch our YouTube channel. Just search Clifton Strengths, and we have tons of resources available for you. You're going to see Brandon again because he's going to come back here shortly at some point and actually interview our producer today. Riley's going to jump in there and have that conversation so you get an opportunity to see. So stay close to us on LinkedIn. Make sure that you're following the Clifton Strengths channel or the Clifton Strengths page there on LinkedIn and all things Clifton Strengths. Thanks for coming out today. Thanks for joining us and all your questions. With that, we'll say goodbye, everybody.
Thank you.